more leaders need to understand that culture is going to exist, develop, grow, whether you are intentional about it or whether you are not. Every office that ever existed has a culture. And I think the more leadership understands that and is intentional about identifying and building the kind of culture that is best for their employees, the more successful they are. I think leaders who ignore culture do so at their own peril. But if you're a business leader and you have a chance to hire a young woman who, and she was brilliant. She was going off to MIT. She was an exceptional kid. Think about the value that someone with that lived experience brings to your company. I mean, if she can't do calculus, like AI can do calculus all day. Like you don't need her to do that. What you do need her to do is bring like that lived experience into your business and make that part of your culture, because the depth that provides, it will be trajectory altering for what you're doing.
What does it take to lead from within, to balance systems change, human needs, and your own well-being all at once? My guest today, Jon Hile, Executive Director at Kansas City Public Schools, and a longtime leader in the nonprofit and public sectors. With decades of experience guiding organizations through complexity, Jon has seen firsthand the pressures that come with being at the helm and the human cost when leadership doesn't center well-being. In this conversation, we explore what it means to truly support people from the inside out, why protecting managers is essential to retaining great teams, and how building a healthy culture is less about slogans and more about systems that actually care. Jon also shares lessons from his own leadership journey and how he stays grounded in high-stakes environments. If you ever ask what it takes to build trust, prevent burnout, and lead with clarity and care, this one's for you. So let's get into it. All right, Jon, thank you so much for being here today. I know you've worked across so many different industries, from like education, nonprofit, and government. And you also mentioned system level leadership. I want to know, what exactly is a system level leadership? And then also, how exactly were you able to work in so many different industries, and how exactly do you apply that system level leadership throughout those three different industries? It's a loaded question, but I kind of want to let you talk for a while.
I appreciate that. And first, thanks for having me
of course.
On the podcast. I'm excited to go through this and enjoy this amazing coffee. I think when I consider my career, the best example of system level leadership that I can offer is really my time as the chair of the board for the Kansas City Public Schools. In that role, you are participating in a system that is as big as any in the country.
Right.
When you think about public education. So you have responsibilities relative to federal funding and national networks of educators. You have responsibilities at the state level. The State Department of Education is a huge responsibility when you're on the school board.
Right.
And then you have the responsibilities locally, which are multifaceted. You have responsibilities to the staff of the school district, to the superintendent. You have leadership opportunities with the broader community, because people care about schools. Parents care about schools, and so
right.
You as a leader in the district are often called upon to help parents understand the direction the school district is trying to go, but also balancing that with ensuring that you're being responsive to parents and community members, so that the school district that we develop in Kansas City
right.
is representative of our community and our values. And so when I think about system level leadership, I think that's probably the best example. Another example I could give, I had the fortune of serving as a program officer with the Hall Family Foundation for about 3.5 years. And that's a different kind of system
right.
Leadership experience. There you gain a deep understanding of how so many organizations in Kansas City that are working around these huge systemic issues, poverty, education, how they fit together, how they work together, where there's overlap. It just gives you just kind of a different perspective of the work that those organizations are doing collectively
right.
and the impact that it's delivering for our community. And so that's a different kind of system level leadership, but in that same vein.
Right. So while you were like navigating, especially on the public school side, because, I've tried to, now I see why I, didn't go any far with my curriculum. Because as you explained that, I was like, wow, okay, that's even more complicated than I thought. How exactly does the process looks like, while you work from different departments, at different level, from state, to local, to parents? How do you balance all of that as, someone whose job is to make sure that you can communicate across all those different departments?
That's a good question. I think the most effective school board members that I worked with and that I saw work when I was in that role were school board members who understood that even though you have all of these responsibilities, the greatest point of influence that a school board has is in the superintendent.
Right.
A high-functioning school board will work directly with the superintendent. Those two entities will be so aligned that they are able to then give direction to the superintendent, give feedback to the superintendent, and then the superintendent will do the work that needs to be done internally with their department leads, with the different staff that are involved, but also with the community. And I think we're seeing that now in Kansas City. We have an amazing superintendent, Dr. Jennifer Collier, and I think if you watch her work, the number of meetings and the number of engagements that she has with people outside the school district, I think really reflects, one, her commitment to community leadership, but I also think it reflects a high-functioning school board and a healthy ecosystem where everyone feels like they can give her feedback and input, and that they'll have the confidence that she then takes that information and makes a decision that helps the district take a step forward.
Right. And how easy does like conflict happen like across those different sectors? Because I had the superintendent here of like the St. Louis Special School District, and then he talked about I asked him a question about the same thing around issues within just like workplace, because at the end of the day it is a workplace, and I want to know. I guess one thing he shared was like, there are three things that helps him to make sure that people are not leaving, especially his people, and also to make sure the board, like the board members are also satisfied. He makes sure that, he's very clear with how he communicates with them. He also makes sure that communication-wise, he's doing his best to communicate with the board, the teachers, and everyone within the organization. Also make sure that when it comes to capacity, he's not overworking everyone else. And I want to see from your own perspective, how does that look like for the, public school system and all the different sectors that are within that? When I say sectors, meaning the parents, all the communities, the board members, and also the rest of the teachers.
Yeah. So I think there are several answers that I'll touch on to that question. The first thing I would just say is I think you've touched on something that is an important piece of school leadership, and that is that the job of a superintendent is exceptionally complex.
Right.
So you think about Kansas City. We have a superintendent who is accountable to 7 board members who represent taxpayers and constituents from the river to 85th Street and from State Line to the stadiums. It's a huge geographic area. Within that geographic area, there are almost 40 individual schools serving more than 15,000 students. There are 2,000 employees of the Kansas City Public Schools. So it is an exceptional...
2,000?
2,000.
Holy, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So again, if you don't think of it as a public institution, as a school district, but instead just think of it as a company,
right.
It's a very large company. Given the geographic footprint, given the number of affiliate sites, the responsibilities, and then you layer on the fact that they're actually doing this work that is essential.
Right.
It is a complex organization. It is highly stressful. There are a lot of opinions.
Right.
And so it is a very difficult job. And so I think the job of a superintendent is very hard. It's hard to hire a great superintendent, which
right.
I'm very grateful that we have. And I think it also contributes to a culture of burnout
right.
Among senior leadership and superintendents when those things are not aligned.
Right.
The other thing I'll say is that the politics around local school districts can be really messy.
Right.
I used to always tell people that, I knew so many people that were reasonable in every other aspect of their lives, but if you talk to them about their children, you talk to them about their property taxes, you talk to them about their property values, they get very unreasonable very quickly. And so I think in school districts, you're really dealing with all three of those pieces.
Right.
No one is reasonable about any of those topics.
Yeah.
And so I think that contributes to a heightened level of discourse that is sometimes very difficult to manage and go through.
Right.
All right. What was the rest of your question? Because I got.
Oh yeah, I mean you've kind of touched on everything, but then I had a follow-up question on that. Since you mentioned that, it's similar to a public company. To like a private company, and you've worked on a private company, you've worked on a public company, you've worked with the government. Do you think that the public school system should be run just like any other corporation?
I don't believe it can be, because the public schools are one of the great American institutions. That they are the original way that our country chose to promote opportunity, to expand opportunity to folks across our communities and our cities. And by and large, they have worked very, very well. I think right now public schools are under a tremendous amount of pressure and stress. So I think it's a difficult time right now for people who work in public schools.
Right.
But I also would tell you this: so as a part of my career, I've had the opportunity to be in classrooms and be in a variety of classrooms and really spend time around educators. And something that I wish more people knew is how much better teachers are today than they were 20 and 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
What we know about how children learn, what we know about how to effectively reach kids, what we know about how we can diversify instruction has come leaps and bounds further than it used to. And if you go into a classroom now, you see a highly trained, highly effective teacher who is oftentimes working with children who are at different learning levels, utilizing different learning styles, and by and large being pretty effective in doing that. And so I do think that in all this conversation about what's wrong with public education, we also need to remember what's right with public education. And that's that we have tremendous talent in our classrooms. And I think we need to work a lot harder to make sure that talent stays in our classrooms, stays in our cities, and continues to deliver life-changing education to our students.
Right. And, my best friend actually, he's... I guess he's fiancé now. I think I should know this. He's my best friend.
You said he's a what?
I said my best friend's fiancé or girlfriend.
Gotcha.
I should know this because he's my best friend. But hopefully, I'm sure he's going to listen to this and be like, "Bro, you don't know."
Hopefully he doesn't listen to it with her in the car. Because if they're not engaged, then
hopefully,
just create some awkward
like
moments.
one of those. But she works with a public school system. And, I've had conversations with her because I had an event where she came and then she asked questions around like resources, because she told me that she sometimes will spend her own money just to make sure that she can speed things up for her kids. And I want to know, with everything going on and all the limited, like resources, how are you guys going about managing your people in these conditions right now?
Yeah. I think that's a great segue to talk a little bit about the work that the foundation does. So the Kansas City Public Schools Foundation is about 10 years old. It was founded as a way to connect the needs of our teachers and our students to the broader Kansas City community. We know that we need to continue to find ways to support our kids, support our teachers, make Kansas City a truly thriving school district. And so the work that we do now allows teachers that freedom. We believe at the foundation that teachers know what their students need. We are able to raise funds from our community. We do a couple of great events. We work with some amazing corporate and foundation partners, and we're able to issue what we call educator grants every year. And so these educator grants, we have teachers apply for them. They put together innovative proposals, creative proposals, really fun proposals. They send them in to us. We have a team of reviewers that go through them. And then we'll fund about 40 every year, where teachers will have access to up to $5,000 to implement a program in their classroom that they feel like will be impactful for their students. And I think what I've seen in that process, and it's a great program. It's a fantastic way for the community to show teachers that we support them, that we care about them. But I will tell you, there's a moment in that process. And so we do an individual delivery to every teacher that gets a grant. I get to show up with a giant, ridiculous check, and we bring it to their door. We knock on the door and surprise them with that.
Right.
And the moment that they know why we're there and what we've brought with us it's such an emotional moment. And I wish this community could see how much it means to our teachers to know that Kansas City believes in them. And it's such a moment of just joy and humility. And for me, it's just a chance to be there and to represent the community as we celebrate the creativity and the excellence of our teachers is truly a stunning moment.
I love that because, one of the things that I like to talk about in this podcast is like psychological safety when it comes to just employees into this, here teachers, because they care so much about their kids. They want to make sure. I mean, I still remember my high school teacher, like my favorite high school teacher till today, Miss Candiero. She's from France who came to Africa, and then she was teaching us. And I was a very bad kid, unfortunately, but then a very smart kid at the same time. So she took so much time. And I remember she would always tell me that you have so much potential, Abraham. And then she will just go into French because she would get so annoyed because I'm like not listening. But yeah, so what exactly does psychological safety, mean in the school setting? Because that's something that I'm not very familiar with. I talk to a lot of CEOs and HR people and chief people officers here, but from the school perspective, especially with everything going on right now, every now and then you hear some, rhetoric about teachers, and I'm sure that concerns them, and in the corporate world, everyone is talking about psychological safety, and I want to know in the school setting what exactly does that look like?
Well, first, I'll guarantee you that people that have those opinions about teachers that like to go on MSNBC or Fox News and talk about everything they know about education, I guarantee you they haven't been in a classroom in a long time.
Right.
So that's generally a very outdated and very ridiculous perspective that they share about the ways that teachers are not meeting the moment.
Right.
I want to pivot and talk a bit about a study that the Hall Family Foundation funded about 3 years ago, right when we were coming out of COVID. If you remember, there was a lot of conversation at that moment that there was going to be a mass exit of teachers from the education system.
Yeah, I did hear that.
There was tremendous concern about that. And so we did a study with the Kansas City Public Schools, with Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, with 5 or 6 charter schools in Kansas City. And we really tried to dig into that issue with teachers. And it was a great study. It absolutely validated a lot of the concerns at the time.
Right.
Teachers were considering career options. They were considering leaving. But the thing that I will always remember about that study is we asked them, how do you feel about your profession? How do you feel? And we asked them to share some good words first. So then that's I'm sure they explained it better when they did the study. But so we asked them, what are some positive expressions you would make about your career as a teacher? I feel impactful. I feel like I'm connected to my kids. I feel like my job matters. I feel like the work that I'm doing is going to make a difference in the world. So it's good.
Right.
And then we asked them to share negative responses.
That's bold.
It is. And they said, I feel overwhelmed. I feel burned out. I feel like I don't have enough time to do all the work I need to do. I feel hopeless. And I remember thinking at that moment, we as a society, we hear teachers say that, and our first response is like, oh, they're just being dramatic. Oh, they'll figure it out. Oh, they're teachers. I mean, they're borderline superheroes anyway. They'll manage it. But then I thought, if you were going in for a surgery and your surgeon said, you know what, I'm burned out, I'm overwhelmed, I can't do all the work I need to do, I feel hopeless, no one would go into that operating room.
Right.
No one would get on an airplane if that's what air traffic controllers were saying. And yet with teachers, we just kind of assume that that's okay. And so I feel like we need to pay a lot more attention to how our teachers are feeling and what they're telling us if we truly want our system of public education to sustain and continue to grow.
Wow. I mean, that's a very powerful way to just break, especially like creating the comparison between surgeon and also teacher. Because to me, I see a teacher being just as important as that. And now I'm wondering, where do we go wrong? Because in a private company, I know like parents are not involved. The community sometimes are not involved. So it's usually between, the C-suite, the managers and also the employees. But now you guys on your end, you have the C-suite, the boards, the superintendent, you have the managers, and then you also have the employees, which in this time will be the kids that are coming to school. But now you have the parents, the entire community to deal with. And I'm trying to figure out, where do we go wrong as a community to a point that there's so much little empathy towards teachers, considering how much work they do, sometimes going above and beyond to make sure that the kids are taken care of. Do you have an answer to that as to where we went wrong when it comes to empathy towards teachers?
I have a guess. I wouldn't call it an answer yet.
Right.
So, as I said earlier, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the teaching profession was very different. Teachers were trusted. Schools were operated from the perspective of, hey, these teachers, they're the experts. They know what to do in their classroom. They know how to deliver results. And somewhere along the way, we decided that wasn't the case anymore, and we had to involve other ways to evaluate how teachers work. And I think that we have started that process. We have continued to layer other evaluative pieces. We have continued to layer other expectations for teachers. We've set what are sometimes very, very high, if not completely ridiculous standards for teachers. And I think we've done all of that against the backdrop of parents who are pretty much just kind of continuing to support schools and teachers the way they always have. They send a candle around the holidays. They may send a gift card at the end of the year. They show up for a parent-teacher conference, and they kind of move on. And I think that what that has done is it's created an imbalance for teachers between what they feel is expected of them and like what they feel is appreciated about them. And so I think, to me, where we can get this right, and I'll speak about Kansas City specifically, I think we have to continue to invest and support programming that is trying to make Kansas City a destination for teaching talent across the entire country. No one else is doing this.
Right.
So there's no reason that Kansas City cannot lead in this space. It's a great community. We have tremendous resources. It's a great place to live. It's fairly affordable, not as affordable as it used to be, but fairly affordable. We should be able to build a school system and just a general community for teachers where they know that if they come to Kansas City, they're going to be allowed to pursue their professional ambitions. They're going to be able to live in a community, to buy a home, to live a great life in a fantastic city, and they're going to want to come here. And I think that really Kansas City, we need to think more about how we make that become a reality in our city if we truly want to shift this narrative for teachers.
Right. Yeah, but I feel like that will take so much work, and I think it will start from the study that you referenced of actually getting like assessment from teachers and getting their honest feedback as to how they feel, either positive or negative. Because me being a storyteller, normally that's how we go about creating films. Whatever is it that we're documenting, we would get as many feedback as we want from the community or people that we're trying to show something to. Yeah. And we take all of that and use it to tell stories around that. So on my own side, I think there's a storytelling problem because there's so much bureaucracy and things that comes with running such a massive operation that you forget the storytelling element. Because in a private company, all those assessments are being done, but sometimes nothing comes out of it. Yep. This is the feedback that I get from employees that would say sometimes they just don't even take it seriously. It becomes a joke in the private sector where people just like, yeah, I saw a meme of someone who's like, after I completed my company's anonymous feedback, it was a guy getting arrested and he's just smiling. And he's like, after I completed my company's anonymous feedback. Sorry. Go.
That's okay.
Ahead.
I want to make another point because I think it's important. Teaching at its core is an exercise in social emotional excellence. Right. Teachers who you can be the most well-trained teacher in the world, but if you cannot connect with students on a personal level, you're not going to be effective. Right. You referenced it earlier. You didn't say that your French teacher was an amazing teacher because she really held you to account on standard 3.4.2. You said that like she cared about you.
Oh yeah,
and she said hey, like you're not living up to your end of this bargain. You're not meeting your full potential. Like she wanted what was best for you, and I think that our schools are littered with teachers like that.
Right.
And it's so important that we acknowledge that. And as you say, that we lean into this idea that we need to be continually checking the pulse for teachers on how they feel,
Right.
and doing what we can do to make it a little bit better.
No, yeah. I mean, I genuinely believe that, because at the end of the day, if you get a genuine idea of what's happening with the people, usually the solution is within those assessments. You can always hear or see, how to actually go about solving that. And especially now with like AI being around, you can take all those feedback and just put it in, and it would literally find, how can I go about solving this?
Yeah.
I do want to get back to that study, because, for example, my high school teacher, she still reaches out to me and tell me happy birthday. She knows my birthday to the T. And she still remind me that she's waiting for me to call her and be like, I'm running for office. I'm gonna say, I don't think that will ever happen. That's how high she
I would ask why not, but we can that'll be part 2 of the podcast.
Part 2. There could be another conversation. But I want to go back to the study and ask, after all of that feedback was received from the teachers, what happened to that study, and was there anything that was implemented after that study?
So in order to bring everybody along, it was important to us that was a study where it felt collaborative rather than evaluative. Mm-hmm. And so the schools that participated each got a copy of the full report, and they also received a copy of just their results. And then the expectation was that they would take that and utilize those results to begin to identify ways that they could start driving those negative numbers down, the positive numbers up. So we felt that was important on the foundation side. We used that to begin to identify potential funding opportunities. Mm-hmm. We looked for organizations that were doing more work to support teachers. Funded them, in accordance with that study. So we were able to use it, I think, strategically from our perspective, but also really pushed our school partners to consider how they might use it most effectively in their school districts.
Right. And where can I find this study? Because I'm a big nerd with like studies like that. I spend my time like reading dissertation from therapists.
Yeah. I don't know that it ever was published publicly. Yeah, I think it was more of an internal document.
So who can I talk to get access to that study? Because
I don't know. I'll see if I have a copy. I'll email you if I do.
Yeah, because I would love to read that. I read a study about like what happened in Germany like years ago, and how that's happening in the US, but like on a very micro level. And then it was so fascinating, but then it had everything to do with like people not being heard. It was so fascinating. So lately that's all I read, just a bunch of dissertation, almost 300 pages. I'm gonna say at this point someone should give me a PhD in something.
Oh man, they should.
Right.
They should.
But yeah, so when it comes to culture, just workplace culture, because at the end of the day, it is a workplace, even though it is a public, it's not private. How exactly do you guys go about, making sure the culture, works for everyone in the company? Because what I see in the private sector is like, for example, there will be, hundreds of teams, members, and each team will have one manager, and those managers. There is sometimes when you look at one team and against the other team, this team is super positive because they have a very funny, extroverted manager, and they see the other team and they're like the complete opposite. And sometimes they have to collaborate on projects, which sometimes there can be a lot of conflict because they're not, there's no, way for the companies to figure out, is this team going to mesh with this team before we invest X amount of dollars on this project and put them together? And so a lot of time gets wasted, a lot of money gets wasted because culturally the teams are not aligned or the departments are not aligned. This is something that I see a lot in the private company. And it goes back to the company culture because in my own opinion, I think a lot of companies don't really understand company culture. They equate culture to, let's say, the nice, kind of like in this building, we have a very nice vending machine. It looks like a spaceship. It has so many amazing things. You can literally, press the button, and I don't even know who created that, but it's such a cool, vending machine, but still it doesn't equate to culture. It's a nice to have. We have a tennis court, we have a basketball court, we have a ping pong table, all this really cool thing, and it's a historic building, but still it doesn't equate to culture. There's so many people in this building that I've never talked to. We just walk one another. I've even had issues with some people because everyone wants to be in their own little bubble. They don't want to, talk to anyone else. So I'm wondering, in the school setting, how exactly does culture look like?
That's a great question. So a couple of general thoughts about culture before I dive into KCPS and what we're doing. The first is, one of the things I've learned professionally is more leaders need to understand that culture is going to exist, develop, grow, whether you are intentional about it
Right.
or whether you are not. Every office that ever existed has a culture. And I think the more leadership understands that and is intentional about identifying and building the kind of culture that is best for their employees, the more successful they are.
Right.
I think leaders who ignore culture do so at their own peril, because there is no way, in my opinion, to rewrite an organization that gets off track because of poor culture.
Wow. Huh. I had a conversation here with like a culture coach, and she also kind of said something similar, but in a different way. And I'm gonna do my best not to butcher it because it's been months since I listened to a podcast. I think she put it this way. She said, culture is for the employee. It's your job to find a desired culture that can meet you where you are before you even go into that organization. Finding something that within that company, either through the interview process, because we see today people go and do like interviews, but they are usually just trying to impress and get the job.
Yep.
Because jobs are getting scarce nowadays. With the economy, people just want to get a job. But in her expert view, she said we should see like interviews different. You have to go in, and it's your job as the person applying for the company to make sure that the outcome within the company should meet you where you are. Because if you don't, then you're more likely not going to stay there long. And I remember recommending that. I think every company should do a podcast.
Yeah, that's
just
great
have
idea.
a random conversation, and then see just where you are. Just an hour, like podcast one-on-one with your potential.
I'm stealing that idea.
No, go ahead. I'm gonna say I think that's actually way better than interviews, because they're very stressful. People are trying to cram so much detail. But if you tell someone, "Hey, we interview different. We do a podcast," and you're going to sit with a decision maker within the company and just have a conversation. They're going to have a set of questions, but they're going to make sure that you are just having coffee with someone, so that you can see if you vibe in the first place with the leader that you're going to be working under. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but then also what exactly does culture look like within KCPL?
No, I love that. I love that point, because it is important. And interviews are ridiculous, right? I mean, if you think about what we're doing, and again, I go back to what I said earlier about teachers. We know so much more about human development, human performance.
Exactly.
And we're still approaching an interview as like, okay, let me ask you these finite questions.
Yes.
That, I'm going to decide like what the right answer is, what the wrong answer is, that allow no space for conversation. And then we're going to decide if you should join my team or not based on how well you can
answer those questions.
You can effectively bullshit me as you go through this.
Yep.
And so I really love that idea of saying, look, how do we make that process better? I will tell you, having gone through interviews before, the best interviews that I have been a part of are interviews that really inspire conversation. And I think the best way to do that is to present questions that really don't have a right or wrong answer.
Right.
It's not would you do this or this? It's like, what if this situation happened? What would your first response be?
Right.
Why? And I think when you begin to ask some of those questions, tell me about a time that you've dealt with this sort of thing, where it's not a yes or no. It's let me learn about you based on how you would respond to this hypothetical event, how you have responded to this event that's happened in the past.
Right.
And I think if we do that, we both make the interview process more conversational, less stressful. I don't have to plan nearly as hard if I'm talking about my own experiences, if I'm trying to, tell you that I know everything about your company.
Right.
And then the other piece that I think is important in that process is that it does inspire that two-way conversation, because that also gives me license to say, well, tell me how you'd respond to that.
Right.
What would you want to see? And I think the more that we can create that dialogue and that dynamic, the more likely we are to land as an employee in a company that matches our values, our work styles. And then as an employer, like, you're going to land somebody that really fits and will do the job well. Because anybody who's been in a leadership position can tell you hiring people is the absolute worst part of any job. It is so hard. It is draining. It's, it's expensive. It's expensive. It's consuming. When someone leaves, you've got to go through a process of, understanding their job position, rewriting it in many cases. You've got to go through a search. You've got to do all these interviews. You've got to negotiate the terms. And then somebody shows up and you've got to spend 6 months getting them up to speed. So in actuality, you'll lose, 8 to 10 months of productivity from that position because you have to go through that process.
No, I mean, this is something that I actually started, offering as a service on the Hiliona. Yeah. I tried to tell companies to do a podcast, because I actually tried it, after my conversation with her. I interviewed someone and I told them it's going to be a podcast, and I told them it's just going to be just me and her, just vibing, talking. And, I only had 5 questions, which I asked her one question, and then, it turns into 10 different questions, because I listen to her respond and I find something and I'm so, well, tell me more about that. And then I will tell her how I would go about it, and then ask her opinions. Literally this conversation right here. And then I would take all of that conversation and I created a documentation, and that became her employee handbook, because it's a meeting her where she is and how she would go about things with the foundation and finding alignment of the company itself. And so far, she has been like one of the most. I'm sure she was the one who actually reached out to you, and then invite you to this podcast.
That's awesome.
Because we did a podcast first, and I ended up hiring her, but her employee handbook was for her. It's because nowadays, I feel like people want to work in places that they enjoy, but they're not finding that, and people are giving up hope to even find that. They're like, I'm just gonna go work, get a check. But if I can find a place that I can actually enjoy and work at, I would love to stay there and actually contribute. Like, even right now as we're talking, she's sending me emails and messages. She's so excited. She's genuinely, enjoying what she's doing with the company now, because especially when I give her the handbook, she didn't even accept. She's like, wow, you had my, ideas and suggestions in the handbook as something that you can bring up and talk to me about it if you want to. So, yeah.
And you can't fake that kind of authenticity.
Right. Yeah. Because it's from her.
People respond to that in such a positive way.
Yeah. So that's one of the services that I'm offering now.
Oh, good. Okay.
So if you guys want to talk more, because I love teachers. Like I said, my life so far, I had a teacher very young that just kind of, gave me all these crazy ideas with my mom that I'm supposed to do this and and I'm saying, here I am today, and she's still waiting for me to let her know.
It's one of the few, I think, shared universal experiences, right?
Right.
And again, it's I guess not universal is probably the wrong word, because it doesn't apply to everybody. But I think if we were to walk into a room of 1,000 people and just say, hey, I want to talk to each one of you, and I want you to tell me about a teacher that mattered in your life, I'm going to bet almost all of them.
Oh, yeah, we all remember that.
We all remember that.
I remember that one teacher that's just stubborn and very opinionated. Yeah, and she listened to all this podcast, so she's going to be very happy that you brought that up.
Very good.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I do want to go back to the study again, because I think it's very foundational to this conversation, and I want to know how exactly this buy-in looks like, because you did share that. After the study was over, you shared it with all the different schools, school districts, right? And then they would have to implement and then hire different, private companies to help them implement that. How exactly does buy-in look like? Because that can be a very big thing in the private sector, where a lot of HR people that I talk to, they want to do all these amazing things for their employees, but sometimes the budget is so thin, and they have to figure out how to make that happen, on an annual basis, not even quarterly, on an annual basis. And it's usually changed. They just got to figure it out.
I think that's one of the challenging things in public education, right? It's so public education is funded by the public per its description. It's funded through property taxes locally. It's funded through state funding, and then there's federal funding.
Right.
But every decision you make around helping teachers have access to more resources, helping teachers have access to, to a more robust work environment. If you want to go in and, redo the teacher's lounge at an elementary school,
right? All
of those decisions and all of those investments have to be balanced with that's potentially fewer resources for kids who are learning. And I think, any educator, anyone in education, especially in Kansas City public schools, would tell you they would never take resources away from kids to make the lives of the adults better. And I think that I appreciate that. I love that. I think it shows the level of commitment we have among our educators, but I think it also shows up in that study, right? And I think eventually we as a community have to understand that if we are not taking care of our teachers, if we are not giving them license to do things for themselves, to pay them, a livable salary, to let the job of being a teacher be fulfilling and something that they can really grab onto, then the outcomes we want for our kids are not going to be possible.
Right.
And I think that that's just a really challenging part of this conversation around culture, around resources, is that any time you want to do something for teachers, that has to come from the general revenue. And it makes it very, very difficult for us to balance other needs.
Wow.
I also think that's one of the things that I foresee the foundation playing a critical role in, because I think the foundation offers us a chance to maybe hack that equation a little bit, because we can go to community partners, we can go to corporate partners. When we have great ideas about what we can do for our teachers,
right,
we can go to the community and pull in revenue and pull in resources that allow us to do that without pulling from money that is directed toward education.
Wow. Well, thank you guys for that, because teachers need as much help as they can. My mom, she was a part-time teacher and also volunteer of the Red Cross. So she was like bleeding hearts, everything.
Oh man!
But she worked so much that I've never actually shared this, but then she worked so much that she had a kidney disease from just exhaustion, because she was always out there giving, donating blood, even though she was in the Red Cross, and she would forget because she's just there for the people and the kids. So as she got older, she's suffering from kidney disease, which is a whole different conversation. But I do want to talk about burnout, because you kind of touched on that earlier. So far, every industry that I've talked to, burnout is like such a major problem right now, due to like capacity problems or lack of communication and no clear direction as to what's happening in the company sometimes. And I want to know, as a leader, how are you guys seeing burnout in the public school, which you've touched on, and what would you wish would have happened sooner, just to avoid just high rates of burnout with within the teacher community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think education, especially like classroom teachers, are susceptible to that. If you're a classroom teacher, your professional year is very similar. It's on the same cadence every year. It can be very repetitive, just in terms of of how the calendar works and what you're doing. It's it can feel very
mundane.
Mundane is a good word. So I think some of the things that have been effective. One is, I think, moving teachers around a little bit. Nothing breaks up the monotony, going from a first grade classroom to a fourth grade classroom.
Right.
Oh, yeah, different challenges, different kids. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good chance to do that. I think we need to do more to offer teachers the opportunity to pursue their own passions and their own development in the summer.
Right.
This all links back to the fact that we do not pay teachers a living wage. Teachers in the summer, they got to bartend, they got to wait tables, they got to teach summer school. Like, we don't give them the summer to pursue their own interest and to get better at what they're doing.
Right.
So I think that should be a priority. Is we need to figure out how collectively we can increase teacher salaries so that teachers can feel like, what, May 25th when school's over, I'm gonna spend the next 2 months pursuing this passion I have for art, or this passion that I have for geography, or I'm going to go tour every Civil War battlefield so I can bring these back for my kids. I think we need to do more of that, so the teachers feel that they have that freedom. And then I think this also requires us to, I think the most complex position in our entire public education system is that of school principal. So when you're a school principal, we talked earlier about how, if you think of the school system as, as a large business, Well, if you're the principal, you're really the manager of a site within that large business, right?
Right.
And I think like any manager at a site, you have a variety of different challenges that are coming at you. You're educating 400 students, which means that you have 400 sets of parents or caregivers that are, that are in your kitchen, that are want to talk to you, that want suggestions on this, or they want feedback on this, or they want to give you feedback. So you have that whole constituency that you've got to maintain strong relationships with.
Right.
You also have 40 teachers and staff working in the building, and you've got to manage that work, and you've got to work with those folks. And then you also have to work within the broader system, right?
Right.
If you're a principal, you report up to probably an assistant superintendent who reports to the superintendent. You probably have to talk to board members every once in a while. There's just a lot of complexity in those relationships. And I think what we've done is we've made that position it almost requires a unicorn to do that well. If you think about all that goes into that, right?
Right.
You've got to have exceptional customer service skills to work with families, to work with neighborhoods. You've got to have amazing leadership skills to work with your teachers and your building level folks. You've got to be an instructional expert because you're going to have to be in that space.
Right.
And then you've got to have the skills that, kind of the business skills to navigate this really complex bureaucracy that you're working through. And so I think that we've got to think more about how we nurture that position, how we prepare people to do that job well.
Right.
And in some cases, how we change the structure of what school leadership looks like so that you have maybe leadership is shared among one or two people.
Right.
And so I think that there's just a lot of work we can do there to take care of our principals, because I would say all of that to lead up to a good principal is the very best weapon we have against teachers burning out.
Wow. So what is the cost, which you've touched on burnout, but like, are there any other costs in not having the right person for that role?
Oh yeah. I mean, it is devastating when a principal leaves, especially a good principal. It's devastating to the families, who feel like somebody bailed out on them.
Right.
It's devastating to students who have to learn a whole different set of routines. It's devastating to teachers who know that they're rolling the dice, and maybe the next building leader is fantastic, maybe they're not. It's it throws everything kind of into uncertainty, and it's bad for this district. I mean, then you've got to bring somebody else in. Again, it's always kind of a coin flip,
right.
And so when that happens, it's a pretty devastating development, and again, it can really set a district and a school back.
Right, and very expensive as well, because I know it takes time to even find the right person for the position, and how how much it like impacts the rest of the entire body of the organization. Because one of the most common thing I see here, especially on the private sector, the C-suite needs the management, like the management sector and the managers, just so that they can communicate with the employees, and then vice versa. So I feel like the principal acts as the like the overhead manager. Yeah. And they manage pretty much everybody else that's underneath them, and they have to communicate to the board and the superintendent and the assistant. That's such a complex system.
It is, and then you think about the fact that at each level of the organization, it requires different skills to be successful. Right. Like when you're a teacher, like it's a very specific set of skills, and you can be successful.
Yes.
Those are not the same skill set that a good principal needs to be successful.
Right.
And a good principal's skill set is not what you need to be an effective assistant superintendent.
Right.
And then when you become a superintendent, all of a sudden you've got to have political skills, and you've got to have community engagement skills, and all these other pieces. And so I think, again, like the idea that we can find people who just magically have all of these skill sets as they move through an organization is fallacy.
Wow.
And so we need to do more to really develop intentionally those skills among folks that are in education.
Right. So are there any policies that makes the storytelling component, more like difficult for you guys to just talk about all of these things that are happening within the company? One
of the things that we've done so internally,
yes.
I mean, I think I would say that we are better today than KCPS has been in my engagement with the district going back 15 years.
Right.
At really providing employees with space to share feedback, to share ideas, to bring employees to the table. Not perfect. And I think if Dr. Collier were here, she'd tell you we're still not as great as we could be.
Right.
But I think we've made significant strides in trying to bring KCPS kind of into the kind of the modern management world. I will also tell you from my perspective on the foundation side, I think telling our story is one of the things we can do that's most impactful. And let me give you a for instance. So, last month we had the opportunity to graduate all 6 of our high schools, along with our evening academy and our middle college programming. They graduated at T-Mobile Center. So it's just a great day.
Yeah,
when you get to go to those moments, like it is a special time. Families come. They're ridiculous. They yell for their kids. The kids are celebrating. It's
doing backflips.
It's anything you can think of. They did, and it was a great week because our families and our kids were very they represented us just to the nines. They did a great job. And one of the things we did at the foundation, we thought this has been so powerful, but for each graduation there may be a couple thousand people in the house. Like, how do we amplify these stories? Because if you hear the stories of kids who are in our schools, if you hear the stories of a graduating senior from Central, and you hear what they've experienced in their life, their ambitions, their goals, their dreams, like, it changes the way that we think about our school system.
Right.
And so one of the things we've done this year is we started a series this year called 90 Grads in 90 Days, and we're doing a profile every day on one of our graduating seniors from across the district. And so I think that's been a way that we've been able to tell that story in a really impactful way.
Right.
And it's powerful, right? I still remember one of the first graduations as a board member I went to was the woman who was the valedictorian. She got up to speak and she was Vietnamese. And so she started her speech and gave an eloquent speech in English. And then her family, her extended family had flown in from Vietnam to be there for that moment. And, she pivoted about 2/3 of the speech into speaking to them directly in Vietnamese.
Wow. That's powerful visually. Yeah.
And then she closed by speaking to her classmates in Latin. And I just thought to myself at the time, I'm like, first I'm like, I don't know that I could have put together 3 sentences when I was a senior in high school. And this lady's up here like blowing everybody's socks off in 3 languages.
That's incredible.
But I feel like our community needs to hear those stories about our kids, because they are every bit as meaningful as all the negative stuff that's out there about kids in any community.
Oh yeah, there's so much negative things out there. That's why I keep pushing on the storytelling component, because I've worked in so many different industries. I used to work for Marvel, as kind of like one of their like distributors, and my job was to just let people know what Marvel was all about and get as many impressions as possible. Because on the private side,
Marvel, like
the studios.
Captain America?
Yeah, I worked on the Spider-Man project, awesome. And
the live action or the
the
Spider-Verse?
The Spider-Verse and then some of the live action.
That's awesome.
But this was a 10 years ago project, because we were trying to figure out in the next 10 years what would the community look like, and we started 10 years ago to figure out in 10 years what would America look like, because they need to make a decision as to like what kind of superheroes they need to create. Should the superhero be a mixed character? Should it be a white or black character? So we did a bunch of research and a bunch of like gamification, where we would have, for example, a couple on Facebook. We would just show them an ad and say, hey, do you want to see how your child will look like? Put a picture of your boyfriend and yourself.
Oh, wow. And
we will tell you how your child will look like. And now this was like machine learning before AI. And we would take those pictures, mix them together, and then it would show them what their baby will look like. And almost probably 60% of the study was just mixed couples. That's when we realized maybe we should have a mixed character someday. Or, but then the study kept changing. Before I left because I became a dad, and it became so creepy to me to keep doing that. I was like, it didn't, dawn on me as a single guy doing that. I love what I was doing. But then when I became a parent, I was like, this is very creepy. Like, but then, I had to leave that industry, but it was so fascinating doing all that research, like 10 years before the actual investment happened. So That's what the private sector is doing. They're spending so much time talking to their customers, understanding them, and making sure that they're speaking their language. And I think unlike the public school, that has to happen more. For example, the Vietnamese girl who was speaking 3 different languages in like a 15 or 30 minute speech. That's incredible.
It is.
Capturing that and showing it to the customers in this sense, the parents, the community, the taxpayers, and putting them part of that journey would bring them to the table and actually build trust.
I don't want to trivialize the importance of academic learning.
Right.
But if you're a business leader and you have a chance to hire a young woman who, and she was brilliant. She was going off to MIT. She was an exceptional kid.
Yeah, Latin.
Or a young woman now. But think about the value that someone with that lived experience brings to your company. Indeed. I mean, if she can't do calculus, like AI can do calculus all day.
Right.
Like you don't need her to do that. What you do need her to do is bring like that lived experience into your business and make that part of your culture, because the depth that provides, it will be trajectory altering for what you're doing.
No, yeah, I mean, that's why I actually got hired by, like Marvel. Someone recommended me because of my background, and just I have a very colorful background. It's not one, and I was going against so many different agencies, but they ended up going with us, which was fascinating. I have one more question before I close, and in order to ask this question best, I'm going to compare the private and then also the public school. In the private sector, what we're seeing today is like, I think we have like 5 or 6 different generations that are coming into the the workplace, and it's like driving HR and people, teams and ops, insane. Because it's like, usually different generations bring different, behaviors, different requirements, different expectations. So it's really hard for them to figure out how do we be, how can we be there for all these different generations. However, on the school setting, you guys are always at any given time, you're dealing with different generation. So I want to know, what are you guys doing to navigate all that, and how can the private sector learn from that? Because I know that the public school, you are not only dealing with 5 generations, you're dealing with the past generations, the grandmas.
For sure.
And then the public space, they're always talking about how do we make sure that we're there for all of our employees? Even Sherm, the HR arm, they did a whole a PR launch, and they were talking about how companies could go about managing different generation expectations. And I read it, I was like, nah, whatever. I was like, you guys need to go talk to teachers. So how do you guys go about managing all of those different generations, expectations, behaviors, and how can the private sector learn from that?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things I'll say, and these are, I'll speak generally, and then I'll speak about public education. So I had the opportunity for 18 years, speaking of your generational changes.
Right.
So I spent 18 years with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Greater Kansas City in a variety of roles, kind of working my way up into a leadership role, and a couple of things that came through that experience for me that have stuck with me around leadership, I think are applicable to this conversation.
Right.
The first is that I think, if you are a leader, one of the most effective ways you can think about your organization is to invert your org chart. So, and that's not anything that's groundbreaking, but I think for us at Big Brothers Big Sisters, when you make that shift and your board of directors and your agency leadership goes to the bottom, and the people at the top are your clients, your families, and the staff that directly support them, I think it forces you to prioritize the things that are most important in a really different way.
Right.
And so I think organizations that do that oftentimes can address some of what you're talking about, because they put the focus not on the people within the organization and not that sort of work, but instead they put the focus on the people that they're serving, the customers that they're developing in a really effective way. So I think that's a really important piece. Something else that I would say is I think there is a hesitancy in our community to acknowledge that demographics are changing very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
One of the examples I'll give. So I was a Centurion through the Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and so I graduated in 2012. And when I was in the program, it was predominantly white. Probably 85 to 90% of people that identified as white, predominantly male. About 2/3 were men. So there was, it was very reflective of what I would consider to be kind of antiquated and traditional leadership and demographics. And so graduated in 2012 and had the opportunity to come back to the organization in 2020 to serve as chair of the alumni board. And in that role, it's great experience. But one of the things you do is you participate in the selection of each centurion class. And one of the things I noticed that in that 8-year period, the demographics have changed completely in the program.
Right.
The last class of folks that I was involved in approving, 35% of that class identified as people of color, and it was 2/3 women. And so I think that demographics are changing so quickly. And to your point, I don't think companies are responding fast enough to that shift and what that means for an internal culture at their building. And so I think that this is a space where public education, where, as you said, we've been in this space for as long as public education has existed.
Right.
This idea of working with different generations, for the past 70 years, we've also been, working in the space where we're bringing a lot of different cultures together. Our demographics of our students are changing, evolving, deepening. In Kansas City specifically, you layer on that the number of refugee and immigrant families that are in our district and make our district so much more robust.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you have a very, very diverse and complex world in which we're navigating. And so I do think there's an opportunity for the private sector to learn from education on how we've gone at some of these challenges, how we've turned the diversity in our schools into a strength in many ways. I think if you spend time in KCPS and spend time especially at our high schools, you will see schools celebrating and engaging and incorporating the totality of the student experience into what they're doing. And so I do think that's a space where public education should feel good about the work that's happened so far. And I think it does offer an opportunity for us to think more broadly as Kansas City in how we can all be more welcoming and more inclusive as we continue to take advantage of all of these amazing people that are coming to our city.
Right. Wow. I love that. And the reason why I asked that is in the private sector as well, when it comes to training the people so that they can manage their people, especially different generation, usually the training will stop at the management level. Yeah. It doesn't go to the C-suite or the board members. It just stops at the managers. So the C-suite has a very narrow view of their own company. They don't really understand their people. Yeah. Usually they just focus on the CFO office. And most companies don't go past that. Now the chief people officers will get the title of chief people officer, but they're not C-suite leaders. They're just managers. It's very common in the private sector. And I want to know in the public school, does training also extend to the board members? Okay, that's good.
Board members, I'm not sure because they kind of control their own training regimen. But I will tell you,
but they do have training. Gotcha.
Yeah, it is not an unusual experience to walk into a KCPS training and sit next to an associate superintendent, sit next to Jennifer Collier. They're in there, they lead by example by participating in some of these trainings, which I think is a great thing. Yeah. And I would also point out that I think this is a space where values matter. You reference that CEOs, they spend most of their time with the CFO. And I think I have an understanding of why that is. Right. But I think it also it represents perhaps a shift of values in corporate America that perhaps needs to be evaluated and needs to be adjusted. I think there was a time in this country where where corporations or companies felt like their responsibilities were to their employees, to their communities. And I think there are many that still view that. Right. I think there are more and more who view their primary responsibility as being toward their shareholders. Yeah. And I think when that happens, you are creating a disassociation within those companies that can be truly, truly detrimental. And so I'm very grateful. So many companies that the foundation works with, I think, are pushing back against that. They value their employees. They value their community. They are investing heavily in this work. And again, I think that those companies are built for success. They're built for longevity, and they will be a part of our Kansas City fabric for a long time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I have my final question, and it's a closing question. And I know we've talked about a lot today. Yeah. I actually went over my script because as you talk, I keep having more different questions that were popping up. But after everything that we've talked about so far, which is a lot, and I'm grateful for that. But I want to know, how is your spirit right now?
I am fulfilled and happy. I think for me, being back in public education is where I'm supposed to be. I feel like I work with people at KCPS
Right.
who are committed to a shared vision. We didn't even talk about the amazing accomplishment this year of Kansas City Public Schools passing the first bond increase in 60 years. Back to your point of culture, we are now going to be able to begin delivering the kind of workplace culture from a facility standpoint that our teachers deserve, that our kids deserve, that our families deserve. So it is an exciting time to be part of KCPS. I always tell people the school district has had two chapters. They had the first chapter where KCPS was very much the gold standard of all school districts. If you go back and you look at the alumni list from Westport High School, Ewing Kaufman was an alum. Two of the first three directors of the FBI graduated from Northeast High School.
Oh, wow.
There's, you look at the alumni board of Southwest, and it is a who's who of of Kansas City civic leaders. Lincoln High School can trace their lineage all the way back to the Civil War.
Wow.
So I think there is tremendous history of success and accomplishment in this school district.
Right.
And then we had about a 40-year period where things were not great. We couldn't get out of our own way. We couldn't decide on a path. All the things I talked about that we were wrestling with at the time, we didn't really do any of that well. And that second chapter was ugly. I mean, if you like Star Wars, it was very much like you had A New Hope, and then you had Empire Strikes Back, and things weren't looking so great. And then over the past 15 years, we've been able to kind of right the ship. And now I believe that our school district and our community is about to write our third chapter. And to me, it is incumbent upon us to remember our history,
Right.
to remember what we learned during those 40 years of difficulty, and build something for this third chapter that will lift us even further.
Right.
And so for me, my spirit is great
Yeah, I
because
love that.
I have a chance to be a small part of that work that this community gets to do together, and
Right.
that to me is one of the greatest privileges that I could ever have.
Right. No, there's so much, like learning to be had in like failure, especially 4 years of just like, positive failure. That's what I call it, because you guys are failing forward, trying to learn from that and pivoting and learning and moving and finding the right people to do that. And I noticed in the private, like the private sector, there's a lot of shame around that, and which creates a lack of purpose. But as you talk about your spirit, I hear so much purpose in the work that you do, especially going back into it and then feeling that yearn and that drive to want to do that positive change. So
One of my
very
good
powerful.
friends is Kate Bender, who runs a great company called Porchlight Insights. And Kate shared an article with me one time that says exactly that as we think about our culture and especially in the public side, we really need to embrace the idea of failing forward.
Right.
There's so much you can learn from failure if you take a moment to just digest it, analyze it, and react to it.
Right.
And so, I think that's a great one.
Oh yeah, this whole podcast is just 7 years of me failing as a CEO. I used to run an agency where I had like 60 something people. That tells you what kind of leader I am.
I know.
Headcount. And I was just like struggling to keep people, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I remember asking my team, and someone even recommended that I needed therapy. That's how bad.
Oh, man.
I was like, okay guys, I'll go to therapy.
I mean, to be fair, every leader, every executive needs therapy.
But it was very hard to read that because I felt like I was doing such a good job, and then they're like, no. And I didn't actually take them to jail and handcuff up. They told me that.
Well, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the things, and I know you were like, I got to cut this, but
Right.
I think one of the
Very
thing
good.
that no one tells you when you are moving into a leadership role is how lonely it is to be a leader.
Indeed.
Like when you are a CEO or you are, a department head, it is so lonely because you don't have that kind of built-in social network
Right.
of employees, and you really can't share everything with your boss because that's not the way things are done. And so
Right.
it is this kind of isolating experience. And so I say that, like, I do believe that
Right.
that CEOs would benefit from the opportunity to be around other CEOs or be
Yeah.
around, or having a therapist, having someone to talk to.
Indeed.
I mean, if it worked for Tony Soprano, it should be able to work for
For anyone. I mean, it worked for me because I had a stutter back then as a CEO, so I had a lot of insecurities. So I was like leading with this like fears that vibrato that I learned from some weird book or YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That this is how you're supposed to lead, and apparently it was that people didn't like that. And then my wife is my second therapist.
Yes,
well.
yes. Yeah.
She has great feedback as well. This has been a very fun and insightful conversation.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I
absolutely.
appreciate where you're trying to add to the to the ecosystem. I think that there's so much promise that still hasn't been realized in the podcast space, and
there's only 4 million podcasts in the world right now. 4 million podcasts in the world, and there's almost
3.9 million of them are true crime, right?
Yeah, literally, and there's billion of people that are listening to it. So that's why I always recommend it as a hub, because sometimes people are driving. Most of the people that listen to this are, surprisingly, I actually had the H&R Block CEO, and I saw in my email list, I was like, wait, what?
It's amazing. And I think the one thing that podcasts provide, and I know this is not every podcast, but I think podcasts move us away from the 20-second soundbite.
Oh yeah,
right.
It goes deeper.
It goes deeper. It forces you to have conversations that are fact based. Imagine if Congress or the Senate operated via podcast as opposed to, via cable news.
Right.
How much more effective?
I know. This thing can keep going further and further, and hopefully the public school system can pick it up. Because I think it will be very, very eye-opening for you guys, because there's already feedback going back and forward already. Yeah. So adding a podcast to it, so you can create documentation for the people you're bringing on, especially leadership.
That's a great thought.
Yeah, because it will help them just have a base of, this is who the leadership is on a professional setting. How can we make sure that we can work with them as effective as possible?
I think it also would help people know your school district better.
Right.
One of the most interesting things about Jennifer Collier is that she started in Kansas City Public Schools as a teacher, and she started as a music teacher because her background is in music performance.
And
so
I would love to have her here.
Yeah,
if you can make the
her
introduction.
story is compelling, and there are people throughout the school district who are who have just amazing stories of really diverse and interesting journeys that have all brought them to Kansas City Public Schools at this moment in time.
Right.
And so I really love the idea of utilizing the podcast format to tell those stories and hopefully to humanize and bring a bit of confidence into our into our community.
No, absolutely. Well, the guy to call if you guys decided.
Yes.
And I'm going to close with this. I hope I can get connected with Jennifer as well, and then have her on this podcast if she's open to it. But again, thank you so much for being here, Jon. This has been very fun. And I'm excited for people to listen to this, because I think the private sector could learn a lot from the public school system in general, because I see it all the time. Like one of my really close friends that comes here on the guest, he's a superintendent of the St. Louis School District, and he's been on this podcast 3 times as a recurring guest.
That's awesome.
Because he would just call me, hey, I want to talk about this. So you also let me know if you ever want to come back and just share anything that's happening within the school system.
Well, let me know how the response goes online before you might be back too much.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been fun.
All right. I've enjoyed it.